as our beloved CEO, Paulette Cole, says, "You, Paul, are truly a gardener of our highest potential, and for this we are deeply grateful." Friends, please join me in welcoming back to our stage Paul Hawken.
Wow, standing ovation before I said anything. It's really cool. It's all downhill from now. I want to really express my thanks to Paulette and Tayana and the staff here at ABC. I get asked to speak in many different places and speak as many as I can or will, but I rarely get asked to speak in a sanctuary. And this is a sanctuary. And it's a very, as a speaker, you're no better than your audience. You really aren't. You cannot be. How could you be? There's a symbiosis between what is spoken, what is heard, and the presence of those who are in the audience. And I just want to say it is such a blessing to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you, because I know it's in a long lineage of extraordinary people. I'm not counting myself as one of them, but who speak here and are blessed by what you've done and what you've created and what you hold here. And so I just, thank you. And to all of you, and let me go to the punchline for this whole talk. Tayana talked about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they released their 1.5 degree report just about 2 weeks ago. And I'm sure, because it's a very literate audience and so forth, you saw all the cascading social media and articles and hand-wringing and despair and oh my God and so forth. And I think that's true, by the way. I think it's based on very, very good science. The whole purpose of Drawdown, when I think about it, is to create the Interorganizational Panel on Climate Solutions. After 30 years, it was created in 1988, right? After 30 years, we don't have that. And intergovernmental, I mean, with all profound respect to what the IPCC does in the Conference of the Parties, which will occur in December in Poland, was the 24th. I mean, half of those governments are corrupt, and we expect them to come up with solutions, and they're either elected or seize power, whatever, every few years. And somehow, I hope it does work, but the world is not Denmark. And I think we are sort of looking for love in all the wrong places, to think that governments are going to get their act together when they have violent disagreements about how to raise a child. Literally. They can't even agree on that. And so I want to say that the purpose of Drawdown is to create an interorganizational panel on climate solutions. And I mean interorganizational, I mean churches, I mean NGOs, I mean schools, I mean businesses, small and large, not just the big ones. And cities and municipalities and farmers, and it's all the way we constitute ourselves on this earth and this country and countries all over to come together and be able to talk about it in a regional, municipal, provincial, wherever the social political boundaries are that are meaningful to them, to come together and be able to talk about, let's figure this out together. That's what we need. And so it doesn't have to go to Paris. It doesn't have to stay in 5-star hotels. It doesn't have to toast itself with champagne. It has to actually work together. And Drawdown as an organization, Project Drawdown, started 4 years ago, but as a collaborative. And that's our middle name, our first name, our last name too, is that we're collaborative. And we knew that our work depended on us modeling what we feel is what the world has to do, which is to do what the molecule carbon does, which is hold hands and collaborate. That's what carbon does. It's an amazing atom, and we are amazing people, but somehow the way it's been communicated to us, the way we have been exposed to the science has been one that has really caused us to become numb and almost disempowered, or go right to the amygdala, fight or flight, right? Like, oh my God, really? What do I do? so what's happened with the communication about the science and then the solutions has been one where 99% of the world is disenfranchised and disengaged about climate. Not our bubble, obviously, and not our friends, but go outside and ask the person on the street, you know, and ask them what 1.5C means to them in 2050. And people look at you like you're crazy, or 2C, or, I mean, it doesn't mean anything to most people in the world. And yet it is so meaningful. And so what Drawdown is about is to sort of do a figure ground shift on that, and to actually move away from the constant repetition of probability of what's going to go wrong, how fast it's going wrong, how it's going wrong sooner than was previously predicted, and may go even faster than that. And that's about probability. And somehow, I don't know how the science community got this idea, but if you restate a problem often enough, you solve it. But actually, that's not how you solve a problem. The way you solve a problem is to say, got it. Wow. 2.5 billion data points, IPCC, extraordinary science. So it's not about marginalizing the science, it's about saying, got it. Now, what are the solutions? What can we do? What do we know? And so Drawdown is very, very much about what do we know, not we, the NGO, Project Drawdown in Sausalito, because if we had gone out into the world and said, this is what we know and this is what we should do and so forth, we'd have all the credibility of a lentil. Come on, we're a California NGO. You know, I mean, it's like, thank you for sharing. But that's not what we did. And we came about because of a deep, deep respect, as I said, for the nature of the problem, but also human nature, right? And so rather than answer questions, and I can say I in this case, because it wasn't a we, well, I started to question the answers. Really different, which is, rather than think I have to provide answers to questions, I want to question the answers themselves. And what were the answers? What are the answers? Well, solar and wind and Elon Musk, you know, somehow that if we get all those right, that somehow we get a hall pass to the 22nd century and nothing could be further from the truth. That's a scientific howler, and they're crucial, crucial, crucial solutions. But we were being told that somehow if they did that, that somehow we would solve the problem. And they being the people who can put up solar farms and big wind turbines bigger than the Eiffel Tower and make electric vehicles that are still mostly unaffordable, right? And so Project Drawdown started for me because of this. And this came out of work I did in Greenland with an expedition to the North Eemian Ice Research Station where we're studying emissions. We were drilling down 2 miles to the bedrock to study basically the levels of carbon dioxide, of sulfates, of pollen, etc., in the little bubbles in the ice. And what you see here is 400,000 years of atmospheric levels of CO2, and you can see a low of 170 and a high there up until that thing crosses the dotted line of 300 ppm. But our species, Homo, has never lived on this planet when it's been over 300 ppm for 2 million years. So Homo sapiens, Homo floridiensis, Homo neanderthal, I mean, all variations of our species has never been here over 300 ppm until 1939, okay? And then away we go. And the current level is 409 ppm, okay? But this is the only come to Jesus moment in the whole talk. Okay, you ready? Okay. This is the actual level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So this is with nitrous oxide, with methane, right? This is with HFCs, with SF6. These are the other greenhouse gases, which we don't count because the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii only counts CO2. So we're at 492, the highest level in 20 million years. Okay, and the reason this is so important to me is because let's go back to language, what we hear is that we should fight climate change. That's the most common phrase. How about mitigate? Okay, we hear mitigate. We should mitigate climate change, right? Mitigate means reduce the pain of something. That's what mitigate means. And I mean, how many people will wake up in the morning and say, God, what a beautiful day, I can't wait to go mitigate. I mean, it's like, it's such a wimpy word, you know, to mitigate. And then we'll say, well, we're going to go on a climate crusade, which is a very unfortunate term if you've read history, and et cetera. So basically, scientists basically created war metaphors to talk about the atmosphere, right? And climate is a miracle. It's not something you should fight. What we should change is what we do here on Earth. It's causing warming. That's why Drawdown is about reversing global warming. Because all climate models are about circulation models. That's what they're about. They're about how the air moves on the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. And when the air warms up, which it's doing, for very simple, clean, clear, understandable physical reasons that we know back since 1857, this is not news, the air moves differently. And it's warmer, it picks up more water. The hydrological cycle is broken or weirded out, is the nicest thing you can say. So there's bigger rains, bigger floods, bigger droughts, because the jet stream moves in new and funny, odd ways, and so forth. So when we look at that, then it doesn't make sense to curb. Like I said, this is what you do to dogs in New York. You curb them. And people saying we're going to curb climate change. Well, what are they talking about? You know, like taking climate to the curb or something and picking it up with a bag? I mean, again, the language is inadequate. When you look at this, the only thing that makes sense is to reverse global warming. Nothing else makes sense. It's like, duh. And it's not like it's a radical thing so much. It is like an accurate thing, which is, why would we want to mitigate this? We want to go back the other way. We're going the wrong way. Sorry. So this is how most people get their news, you know, about climate, which is in headlines, and they're meant to just completely freak you out. That's their purpose. The people who do websites and news sites and so forth know exactly how your brain works. They really do. I think they have neuroscientists on their staff. I don't know what it is, but basically the science here is correct, by the way. The headline's correct scientifically. The picture is, you know, the Tower Bridge, and I don't know about that one, but I mean, that is, and then of course there's always, you know, clickbait. So to relieve your fight or flight syndrome, which comes about from reading that thing about, you know, in this case is about a woman who smashes her husband's head with a frog ornament and keeps him mummified for 18 years in plastic sheeting, and you go, oh, well now you can forget about your headline, right, and so forth. And this is how most people get their news and information about climate. And so what do we expect those people to do, you know? I mean, and then if they actually are inspired by it and they go to Google and say, what are the top whatever, 10, 100, whatever solutions to global warming? I don't want to be in everybody's way here, but this is what you'll get. And these are two extraordinary scientific institutions, you know? And you look at the left list, you know, from the Scientific American, and I don't know about you, but I call them Proverbs, and it should be number 6, love your mother, and, you know, don't kick dogs. I mean, this thing is like, yeah. And then the third one in the Union of Concerned Scientists is put a power strip in your home entertainment center. You're going, come on, like I don't have a home entertainment center. I don't have to get one to put a power strip in it. I mean, to save the climate, and to, you know, it's like the whole thing is so crazy making. Because unless you have an IQ lower than room temperature, you know this isn't adequate, you know? This is not gonna, we're not gonna make it doing this, you know? And yet, it's not, we shouldn't wash our clothes in cold water. I mean, that's a really good idea, for sure, you know? So again, it's not so gainsaying it so much as the gap in communication and connection that people have to this extraordinary civilizational issue, which is global warming. And so what motivated me specifically to bring a small group of friends together to create Project Drawdown was this term, which I started here in 2013, and Jim Hansen and Bill McKibben. There's 3 articles that came out that just scared the pee out of you. Global Warming's Terrifying New Math in Rolling Stone, and Jim's did it in the New York Times. And people came to me who are like yourself, activists, literate, effective, and said it's game over. And I'm hearing that again with the thing that just came out 10 days ago too, with the IPCC, which is, oh, it's game over, you know. And for me, I've been thinking about Drawdown for many years, actually proposing that we do it, and nobody really paid attention to me, which is not unusual. But I began to think, well, sometimes when you give up, you know, when you give up, and that's actually an opening, actually. When you surrender, like, things open up. And so I thought, actually, maybe it's game on, not game over. That there's enough news and information about what's going on to say, maybe it's game on now, you know. And I remember Giselle Bundchen, who's of course a famous model, but she's an extraordinary woman, and she's passionate about the environment, and she's married to an extraordinary man, Tom Brady, the quarterback of the Patriots. But my wife Jasmine and I were together with her in LA for the Brazil team of Drawdown, and Tom Brady happened to be there because he was going to see his mom in San Mateo, who was ill. And we were talking about this game over, you know, and then I turned to Tom, and this is the year before last year, and remember they won the Super Bowl 31-28, and you may not remember, but the point being is that they were behind 21-3 at halftime, and they went behind 28-3, and people were walking out of the stadium, turning the TV off and saying, oh, what a boring game. And the Patriots are dead as the doornail. And I asked Tom, I said, when you went to the locker room, was it game over? And Tom has like he's got an innocence. I don't know how to describe it. I mean, for such a famous person, he's like innocent. He looked like, he said, no. He said, we never think that way, ever. I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, before a game, we study the strengths of the team's defense and offense. We studied them. So, well, what did you do at halftime? He said, oh, we knew the weaknesses by then. We studied those. And they had the biggest comeback in NFL history. But whether they did or didn't, it was really that way of thinking, which is that when we see these reports come out, there's this sense of, oh, it's kind of game over, and oh my God, and that's really the language. But you know, the IPCC, bless its beautiful scientific heart, does have a thing on solutions. It's called the Third Working Group. And I have spent years trying to find anybody who read the Third Working Group paper that came out in the fifth assessment. It's longer than War and Peace. So for those of you who have read War and Peace, I'm an English major, I had to, but it's over 2,000 pages, and no one in the world has ever read it. Not even the copy editors. I said, well, the copy editor, no, they broke it up. So that no copy editor would want to read 2,000 pages. I mean, it's really, really, really boring. And I said, well, that's their solutions, you know. And so what Drawdown was to come together and to map, measure, and model the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming. Two things there. One, name the goal. If you don't name the goal, what's going to come of it? And the thing about goals is the more unrealistic they are, the more effective they are. Think about that. The more unrealistic a goal is, the more effective it is, because it opens up everything. When you have a very, very doable goal, it doesn't open up your imagination, creativity, because like, I know how to do that. We can do that. Reversing global warming? Okay, let's think about that one, you know? And so we named the goal, and then we named the process. And the process is fairly straightforward. We wanted solutions that were well in hand, that is, we understood them, for which there was peer-reviewed science on either two things: how much could be avoided in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, or how much CO2 could be sequestered, brought back home to Earth by photosynthesis in different land use and farming practices. And there's only two things you can do, and we wanted copious peer-reviewed science on the solutions. We wanted solutions that were scaling. We wanted solutions for which there was evident and a lot of economic information from internationally respected economic institutions, the IEA, the World Bank, the FAO, IPCC, Bloomberg Energy, etc. And so Drawdown was going to try to find what the 100 most substantive solutions were. We started with 300. We kept winnowing them down. And then using that information, we were going to basically model it and see what would happen if these solutions that are scaling continued to scale over 30 years to 2050, and could we achieve drawdown? And I want to emphasize that we went into it, we had no idea whether it was possible or what the numbers would say. We did the math. And to do that, we didn't have any money, which I recommend to everyone at certain times of your life. It makes you very creative. We put the call out to universities all over the world for drawdown fellows. And we were overwhelmed with applications from people who were Rhodes Scholars, Fulbright Scholars, Aga Khan Award winners, White House Fellows, just extraordinary people. And half PhDs, almost half women, not quite. And it was a meritocracy. We weren't choosing it by gender. We chose by merit, but that's how it worked out. And 21 countries at that time, it's 26 countries now, by the way, 6 continents. And they basically did a master's thesis on each solution, and for which we paid the princely sum of $1,000. You know, I know. It came out of my retirement account, so it couldn't have been higher. And later, when we got some money, we increased that to $2,000. But they weren't doing it for money, of course. You know, they were doing it because they cared deeply, as do you, about the problem at hand. And let's figure out what the solutions are. And we got 128, I think, advisors and botanists and biologists and politicians and business people and writers and authors and indigenous leaders, etc. And then we had 40 outside scientific expert reviewers review the model. So what you see in Drawdown, whether it's the website or the book, or what you're seeing is been carefully vetted. And the methodology prohibited bias, which is very, very important, because we all have a bias about what we ought to do or should do, or what really works or what doesn't, all that sort of stuff. You don't realize you have a bias until you see your bias blown away, which is what the results did for us. And so what you see here is, you know, a solution, afforestation, which is planting trees where there hasn't been trees before, or they were cut down so many hundreds and centuries, so many years ago that nobody realized it was a forest. But that's afforestation, and the rank is by, in this case, amount of carbon sequestered that is brought back down to Earth. And this is over 30 years, okay? So, and again, it's scaling something that is scaling now. And this is the number of gigatons. Those are billion metric tons of reduced CO2. And then this is the cost. And this is the return over 30 years or so forth, you know. And so I just want you to see, what I do quickly, I'm just going to go through solutions, but give you a sense of the diversity of the solutions, because again, wind, solar, you know, EVs and, you know, recycling, and, you know, it falls off really rapidly after that for most people until recently. And so buildings in cities, you know, green roofs and bike infrastructure and smart glass, which is, so it's an interesting solution, walkable cities, transport. This is a Boeing, NASA, MIT plane, a CMU plane that is running on electricity, and it's being designed right now, and with biofuel as the source of electrical generation on the plane itself, and it's actually a huge plane, and the rest you know. This is transport as well. This is because my friends started Lyft, and I thought, well, this is ride sharing. You guys talk about ride sharing. There's one person in a car, I mean, then a driver. I thought, well, okay, but you want to know ride sharing. India knows how to ride share. This is electric bikes. Solar, you know, in Streaming, there's solar water there. The one on the left-hand side, wave and tidal. And this, again, the number 2 solution actually was wind. And this photograph is to give you a sense of scale. These turbines are extraordinary now. They have sensors on the blades. And so when the blade is at the top and it's swinging down, the blade actually torques and changes shape every second as it's turning. Amazing technology, because the wind speed at the top is much higher than the wind speed down at the bottom. And at all levels, so the blade is actually conforming to the speed of the wind in real time in order to capture the most amount of energy. It's just extraordinary. It's the cheapest form of newly installed electricity in the world is this. This is the cheapest form. It's not gas. It's not coal. It's these wind turbines. And this is offshore wind, and this is the in Norfolk, Sheringham Shoal. These are 3 megawatt Siemens wind turbines, but and this is a triathlete in the foreground. But since we did the book, the price on offshore wind has just plummeted, and these numbers are very conservative, which brings to a point that I wanted to make, which is that in everything we did always the lowest, the most conservative number. And the reason for that was if we're going to be criticized, we want somebody to say it's better than that, it's better than that. And that's exactly what has happened. And what they don't know is when we get that criticism, everybody in the office is grinning like a Cheshire cat. We're going, yeah, because it is better than that. And that's exactly what we wanted people to notice, This is Rooftop Solar. And the point of this is, why is she smiling? She's not smiling because she's made a contribution to reversing global warming. She's smiling because those are her daughters. And she lives in a straw hut on a straw island in Lake Titicaca. And that means she doesn't have to use kerosene anymore, so her girls can do homework at night. And 98 of the 100 solutions in Drawdown are things we would want to do whether there was a climate scientist alive and we had no clue as to what was causing extreme weather. We would want to do these solutions because they have so many benefits for mothers, for families, for communities, for water, for children, for the future, for jobs. I mean, it goes on and on. So this idea that somehow we should sort of pivot, and address climate change and abandon the economy, that's not true. What we should do is go to the economy that really works. And the economy that really works is the one that serves human needs, not the needs of the rich and the oligarchs. This is land use. This is peat down here. This is what the land looks like when there's the land before. This is the land after when you scrape off the peat. But look how it's it's there with the solution. Again, most people don't realize some of these solutions. This is indigenous people's land management. The important figure there is the bottom right. We can't do cost. That's stupid. Or savings. What we can do is say this is how much CO2 the Kayapo in this case. But indigenous people are sitting on, literally in this case, but I mean in terms of biomass above and below ground, okay? And this is an extraordinary amount of carbon, CO2, but carbon and CO2 equivalents. This is the same thing, but this is land that was once managed by indigenous people, and they're gone now due to the deracination of indigenous people. But in this case, this is the Kermode bear and the Great Bear Forest in British Columbia. And again, notice that number down there. Forest protection is extremely important. And it did come out in the 15C report. This is food. Food turns out to be an extraordinarily important solution. We'll get to that. This is farmland restoration. There's 1 billion acres that's been abandoned on land, 1 billion hectares, excuse me. And this land used to produce food, and it's gone. And it's been ruined by farming practices. And if a cup is empty, it can hold the most water. So this land can hold an awful lot of carbon if you apply regenerative farming techniques to it. And it's there. We don't need any more land to feed the world in 2050. We don't need to cut another tree to feed the world in 2050, as we are often seeing. This is women smallholders. Again, I just want to give you a sense of the novelty and the difference in the solutions. Why didn't we hear about this? And women smallholders are part of the overall smallholder community in the world, which is people with 2 hectares or less of land is classified as a smallholder, and 40 to 43%, depending on the continent, are women. The smallholders produce 70% of the world's food. 70%, 70. Big Ag produces 28% of the world's food. Do the math. Women produce more food than Big Ag. Okay. Like, again, who knew? This is FAO. Again, we're not there, telling you something. We're reflecting back what we already know. And Big Ag keeps telling us that if we don't do what they want to do, and which is basically poison the land and turn soil into dirt, and to use GMOs and so forth, that we won't eat. But actually, it's the other way around. It's upside down, backwards, because Big Ag doesn't produce food. It produces big pharma. It produces obesity. It produces type 2 diabetes. It produces, heart attacks, strokes, CAFOs, soy and corn for pigs and cows, sugar, hydrogenated fat. I mean, come on. This is Big Ag. Big Ag doesn't feed us. It kills us. And it kills the earth. And it produces food that's unhealthy and demineralized and so forth. And here women produce food that is edible and clean. And the thing about women is if we give them the same seeds and tools that men get, and support, they outproduce men 10 to 20%. And so if we support women smallholders, we produce a lot more food, and it saves deforestation for agriculture. So again, and I think you'll see this, the thing that came out of this is the importance of women. And again, climate change or global warming has been talked about in such a male way. God bless males, I'm one. But, the thing is, but women were excluded. It's like, what did women have to do with this, they have a lot to do with it, as we'll see. And this is reduced food waste. 40% of our food in the United States is thrown away, 133 billion tons a year. It's just amazing. And that's almost, 557 pounds a person here, per person. We throw it away. And you say, no, that's not true. It is true. But it's also lost in the developing world from lack of supply chains and cold chains, and people produce the food but it doesn't get to market because they can't get it there, and they lose food. Poor people don't throw food away. Only rich people do. This is PlantRich Diet, which is not a vegan, vegetarian, or other type of diet. We're not telling people what to eat. We're telling them that they should eat the proper amount of protein for their body and for their well-being, which is 50 to 55 grams a day instead of 90 to 100 grams. And that if they shift the lower protein intake to plant-based, not entirely if you want to, but halfway or more or less and so forth, and you raise the protein intake in the world where people have insufficient amount of protein, and this is what you get, the number 4 solution to reversing global warming. And you put number 3 and 4 together, and you got food being 3 and 4. It's astonishing. Clean cooked stoves, another food solution. This is black carbon. Again, you want to do this for the health of the woman, for her children, for everybody inside where those unclean cook stoves are. This is girls' education. Girls' education is the number 6 solution, and for very simple, the girl effect. When you yank a girl out of school, all sorts of things happen at puberty. She has an average of 5+ children. The health outcomes are not good. They're not good for her children. She doesn't earn so much. Her own health outcomes are sacrificed because she's having children oftentimes that are too early for her body. But if a girl is supported to finish what would be the equivalent of a high school education, she has an average of 2+ children. There's replacement rate. And her children are much better off. There's 98 million girls who should be in school right now and not in the world. And my gosh, if they were in school, what a difference they would make. We know they earn more money, they have a better education, their children do better. It's a virtuous circle, and it's a vicious circle. And girls are pulled out of school for 2 reasons: early marriage, or to go to work, to put their brothers through school. And I remember being at the Commonwealth of Nations talking to the high commissioners there, and I gave this talk, and there was a woman from Grenada there, and she was saying, "I'm very upset about this. I'm very upset. In Grenada, we treat our girls very, very well." I said, "Well, it doesn't apply to you." She said, "Yes. But it's the boys that do the devil's work." They need the education. Anyway, I'm sure that's true. But this is a pathway to family planning. But it's not about family planning. It's a pathway to the empowerment of an individual, of a woman, right? And she makes choices that are sensible for her. And the other solution about family planning is family planning. And so you put these two together, and you notice this is the same number because we split the difference in the impact it would have if there was 1.1 billion people less in 2050, and the UN says that's almost entirely due to family planning, and that's why. So you put these two together, the number one solution to reversing global warming would be the empowerment of girls and women. Again, who knew? Who's saying that? Why do we still think it's a solar panel when it's actually a woman? Anyway, I can't tell you why, but I'm not an anthropologist, but I'm just saying this is the kind of stuff that came out from what we think is a very objective methodological approach to determining what are the most substantive solutions to reversing global warming as opposed to the ought to list or should list. And these are coming attractions, and I'll go through them really quickly, but basically there's not sufficient data. They're new, they're scientifically validated, but we don't have economic data. Some of them aren't even businesses yet. But this is really regeneration, permaculture in the water, in the ocean, and you bring up the thermocline, the cold waters, and you bring them up to the surface, this happens automatically. The oceans regenerate very easily. But they need a little coaxing because the oceans are covered with heat blankets from warming, and it's suppressing the normal circulation of the thermocline going up from the deep parts of the ocean up to the surface and back, where the nutrients are. You get phytoplankton, zooplankton, kelp and algae, feeder fish, forage fish, and so forth. They did this in 6 weeks north of Hawaii, and in 6 weeks you had whale sharks, which are vegetarians, circling this structure under the water, to eat the kelp. And so the oceans, we think of land and regenerating the land as a way to bring carbon back home, absolutely, but there's ways that we can actually use the oceans in a way that regenerates the oceans, and nothing sequesters carbon, or in this case carbonic acid, which is acidifying the oceans, than kelp. Nothing. Remember, there's nothing in the world that does it faster. This is, again, how do we use nature to regenerate or to prevent things? And this is the subarctic circle, the mammoth steppe. And two biologists in Russia basically pointed out that it was populated heavily with buffalo and wolves and elk and Yakutian horses, and just it was a mammoths too, the woolly mammoth, of course. But I mean, and they were all wiped out by the Clovis people 12,000 years ago. And if we bring animals back, it's a permacross protection plan, because these animals in the winter, these are reindeer, but what they do is they brush away the snow in the winter when it's dark to get to eat, to survive, and then the temperature of the soil goes down 2 degrees, and it perfects the permafrost. So again, this is I just want to give a sense of the imagination and beauty of human genius that's going on. And this is, fusion energy for sure. This is a reactor inside it. But this one, I'm not going to talk about fusion. They're one engineering milestone away from achieving fusion. But I want to talk about this as about a forcing function. What is a forcing function? Again, it's a goal that's unrealistic, so difficult. Like, come on, you can't do that one, right? You can't reverse global warming in 30 years, impossible, right? This is where they tried to make starlight. That's what fusion is, making starlight on Earth, okay? Good luck, and everybody's failed. But what came out of this recently was that in order to do a firing, to plasma, to create fusion, they have 400 capacitors, which is like a different type of battery, but it's a battery. 400 capacitors, really seriously big capacitors, to have all that energy running within 8 nanoseconds of itself, to get all that energy. And they realized that like a battery in your car or anything, batteries are no efficient than the most efficient cell. So even in your car, we have lithium-ion batteries in the back if it's an electric vehicle. The least efficient battery there will be the gating mechanism in terms of how much power you get, right? They couldn't afford that. They couldn't do that because with 400 capacitors, they needed every bit of energy they could get. And so they figured out how to prohibit that from happening, and they created a chip and some software, and they fixed it. All right, So what? The so what was, a professor from Stanford came there and said, do you know what you've created here? And they said, yeah, we look at capacitors and blah, 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 blah. I said, no, 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 no. Do you realize what you've created here? He said, no, you've made every EV in the world 25% more efficient. Oh, they didn't know that. And they've already signed $50 million in licenses, for this technology to EV companies and so forth. So again, I just want to say that making the goals as big as possible opens up everything. And building with wood, who knew? Again, a 90-plus story building is going up in Tokyo. I think Mitsubishi's putting that up. And basically steel and concrete are 11% of global emissions, and steel and concrete buildings are very flammable, believe it or not. If anybody's been to Dubai, you've seen the Torch Tower. Very unfortunate name for the Torch Tower. It's burned twice. And these are more fireproof than steel and concrete buildings. You can read the book or the website to tell you why wood would be more fireproof, but it is. But the thing about this is that we're talking about cities and buildings that actually do what nature does, which is sequester carbon instead of emit it. And cities, rather being the source of 40 to 45% of emissions, actually can be like nature, designing a city like a forest so that actually is part of the healing mechanism of Earth as opposed to the harming mechanism. And this one is simply scientists discovered that cows that ate kelp, produce more milk, but why? And they thought it was because they didn't produce as much methane, which is a very inefficient metabolic process in ruminants. And they got together and they discovered that there's not enough kelp in the world to feed the cows. 3 billion, animals that are in CAFOs. Anyway, but there's a red algae that's prolific in the tropics called Asparagopsis taxiformis, which if fed in a 2% amount in feed to ruminants reduces methane emissions by 70 or more percent. And this is 14% of global warming emissions are from ruminants and so forth. And all I want to do is give you a sense of possibility, because we were very careful to model things that were scaling in place. We understood it, peer-reviewed science. But we have a database of over 100 more of these solutions coming. And I just want to give you a sense that your sisters and brothers and compadres out there in the world are on the case, The techniques and practices and technologies that we have at hand isn't all that we have at hand, and it's not all that's going to be here in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. More is coming, and it's extraordinary, and it's restorative, and it's regenerative. And what surprised us? Well, the whole damn thing surprised us. The number one solution is refrigerant management, and we said, oh my God, that's just a PR disaster. People like, what's the press release going to say? And but the gases used in refrigerant, whether it be an air conditioner or a refrigerator, are from 1,000 to 10,000 more times more powerful than CO2 is global warming potential. So, and they leak like crazy, and when they're taken apart, they go right up into the air. And as you can see here, I talked about food. The number one sector, though, is food. Food. In a big way, And why? Well, first of all, it's with transport, which is curiously over here, the smallest sector. So the two biggest sectors are transport and food in terms of emissions caused, but the biggest solution is food. And that's because it's a twofer, which is it ceases emissions, but it also sequesters. If you change agricultural practices, and so forest farms, regenerative agriculture, etc., you're actually bringing carbon back home. So nothing else is really like that. And you see that the number 3 solution is land use. You put those two together, you can see how important the land is as a solution. Number 4 is women and girls. Electrical generation is number 2, and then your materials and buildings and cities. And the reason this is small is because so many of those solutions are in materials and they're in electrical generation. Transport's small because remember I said we use other people's information, and the World Bank and the IEA say that we're going to have 2 billion vehicles in 2050 instead of 1 billion. I don't believe that for a minute, by the way. I think we're going to go to transport as mobility, you know, and nobody, who wants a car, really, you know? And so I think it's going to go down, but we, again, that's my bias, that's my opinion, and I'm going to hold fast to it, right? But I think so I think transport's a much bigger contribution than we show. And then here, I don't know why we're missing the numbers on the left, but the slide is all messed up. Okay, but anyway, it shows the top solutions without the numbers, and I apologize for that. And then what we also learned in Drawdown is how not to communicate. And then we talked about this when we started, you know, which is stop using words that basically are divisive, that actually treat or assume the climate is other, you know. And this sense of otherness, that people are other, you know, cultures are other, races are other, religions are other, is the same thinking that got us into the problem. You know, the climate is other. It's if we can dump our emissions up in the atmosphere, no problem. It's other. You know, the Me Too movement is what? It's men treating women as other, right? It's so this is the disease. This is the, you know, and so look at the words, slash emissions with your, what? Carbon machetes? I don't know. The carbon war room, negative emissions, decarbonization. I'm sure you've heard of that. Decarbonization. We have to decarbonize. No, we don't. We have to recarbonize. We decarbonize already. And our ag practices and deforestation and combustion of coal, gas, and oil, we put carbon up there. That's called decarbonization. That's not what we want to do to solve it. We want to recarbonize and bring it back home as where it belongs. And what we did is put ancient sunlight in the form of photosynthesis and coal, gas, and oil, and we burned it, and we put it back up in the atmosphere, you know, and we want to bring it home. So this is how we should communicate. These are the words. This is what connects us. And the girl you see on the left side is a photograph taken by a friend of mine, Chris Jordan, in Kenya, and we love the photographs in the book, but when we were making the book, and we had her photograph up, in the room, and we said, that's our client. That's who we work for. In other words, we knew who we worked for, so we just had to look at it every day, and it was very clear why we were there, what we were doing, and for whom. And so the book came out, and there was this, I just said, the brash subtitle, what's happened with it since I was here last? A lot. It's in 12 languages. It was a bestseller. This is such a New York story, but we're Penguin Random House, and you know, it's the publishing center of North America here. And my editor of 30 years didn't really want to publish the book. And we've had 4 bestsellers together, he and I, and like I'm not a schmuck, you know. It's like, and. But the reason he didn't want to publish it is because climate books don't sell. And I mean, who wants to read about the end of the world at bedtime? I mean, not really. It's like, oh, it's thrilling. You know, it's not thrilling. And so you had, you know, publicity, and you had publishing, you know, production, you had academics, you had editorial, you had all these different people arguing about whether the book should be published at all. And it was a woman is the head of Penguin. She's called the publisher, but she's the CEO, let's be real. And she listened to all this, and they had meeting after meeting after meeting. It was the last meeting where they're deciding the fate of Drawdown, where the publisher not 100% post-consumer waste, expensive, okay? Color, really expensive. You have to do 10,000 at a time. You can't do 1,000. We're going to be stuck with these books. They're going to come back to us, you know. They'll be remaindered. I mean, they had all sorts of reasons why not to do this. And she then said, she listened to all this and said, may I ask one question, which is, you know, she's the CEO. Yes, you can. And she said, if we don't publish this, which is kind of what I'm hearing, why are we here? Published. And what was so great about it is that it was the New York Times bestseller list its first week out. And I felt so validated for her and the house and everybody else, and everybody got in front of that parade in the house and said, yeah, you know. But I mean, and I feel like the reason it's continued to sell, it's in its 10th edition, it's in 12 languages, or just about ready to be in 12 languages, is because people buy it and give it to other people. That's why. And because it's like a message, you know, you can't give a URL to somebody and make a big impact. But if you give a book like this, you know, which is you can read from the middle out or any way you want, it's very different. So I think that's why it's become a bestseller. I could be wrong. And this, it's the only book I know of that's taught from 4th grade to graduate school. Unbelievable, you know. It's so, and this is up in the air, University of Colorado. It's a theater company for 10, 11-year-olds, you know. And basically, they act out solutions. And can you tell me what solution this is? Huh? PlantRich Diet. Yeah, they're peas and carrots. And the thing about the way we've been teaching kids about climate is it's a friggin' disaster. Come on. We should be treating them that it's a miracle, because it is. And we should be teaching children to fall in love with this miracle, this extraordinary planet we live on. If they fall in love with it and look at their faces, the joy they have about acting out these solutions, then they can understand the problem. You know, they have a context within which to understand the problem. But if we teach them it's a disaster, first of all, that's not true. But second of all, what have we done to our children? Really, you know? I mean, to start that young with that sense of the world, which is not only inaccurate, but is so diminishing to what a child is, who a child is and can become, and their imagination and so forth. So that's another outcome to Tayana's about what's happened in 18 months. And there's a conference at Omega this weekend. There's teachers from all over the country and actually parts of the world who are coming together to talk about Drawdown Learn, which is how to teach Drawdown to different schools, traditional black colleges, indigenous people, and all grade levels and college levels. And I wanted to end with this because this is Mark Watney in The Martian. You know, he got back, so it's been out long enough to not be a spoiler alert. And but it was the end of the movie, which I think is important, because The Martian is not about Mars. It's an allegory about Earth. I don't know how many got that one. There he is, like, growing potatoes in his own poop, right? Like, whoa. But, I mean, the point is, what he was saying is it's a closed system, right? It's a closed system. This is the closed system. It's called the Earth, right? And then at the end of the movie, he is the Amanos Gree, you know, and he goes to a university, and there's all these wannabe astronauts, you know, and he said, listen up. When I was up there, did I think I was going to die? Absolutely, and it's going to happen to you. Space does not cooperate. Atmosphere does not cooperate, doesn't give a hoot what we think, who we vote for. And he said, when you're up there, at some point, everything's going to go south on you, and you're going to think, this is how I end. And he says, you can either accept that, or you can go to work, and you do the math. He actually said that. That's what we said. We do the math. He said, you do the math. I was watching going, oh my God, he's channeling us. And he said, you do the math, and you solve one problem, and you solve another problem. And if you solve enough problems, you get to go home. That's the end of The Martian, right? And that's what this is about, right? Let's go home. Can we come home? This is home. This is home, right? Our community's home, our family's home, our friends are home, our place is home, our habitat is home. This earth is our home, and we want to come home. That's what it's all about. And nothing less than that. So it's not about fighting, it's not about being right. And in Drawdown, you'll see that we never say we're right, because as soon as you're right, you've made someone wrong. In fact, so I got in front of that one and said, we are wrong. We are wrong. But we think it's approximately right, but you can help us make it more so. So collaborative, learning organization, connected, together we can do this. I know we can. And the nice thing about doing it in a grounded scientific way, I feel like you can't look at the stars unless you're actually standing on the ground, otherwise and so it was very important that the math, that the diligence, that the of the modeling, was so exact. There's I don't know how many data points, 5 million data points, thousands and thousands of sources in the book, that created that book. But it's not about the data. It's about sort of assuring the reader that, we did our homework. Okay, but now look at the stories, look at the meaning. What is it? How does this touch you? And whatever level of agency you have as an individual, as Paulette, as somebody who has this extraordinary, I won't even call it, I don't know what to call ABC. It's not a store. What's your noun for it? I don't know. It's like, it's something beyond a department store. Is really reductionist. But whatever your level of agency, whether you're teaching or whether you're head of an NGO or whatever it is and so forth, this book speaks to you, because it's what we know, that is to say you, it's what we know, And this is about life and death, for sure, and it is. So it's no wonder that people get all, a little bit crazed about it, But at the same time, it's about really, who are we? Who are we? Why are we here? Why are we here? Think about it. And from my point of view, nothing could be more meaningful than to come together and to connect with each other and to reverse global warming, because it's transformative in every single way that we need to transform this earth, and people and place and community and things and materials and energy and transport and habitat. Since I have the clicker, I'll show you one more slide, and which I was going to show that if somebody asked the right question, but and then they might actually anyway. But the next book is called Regeneration, and the subtitle is How to Create 1 Billion Jobs. And what it does is to take the solutions, because no solution exists by themselves. They're part of a system. A system caused it, a system heals it. But what we know from economic complexity theory, Cesar Hidalgo and Ricardo Hausman's work at MIT and Harvard, that the more complex you make an economy, the better the outcomes are for everybody. And so we know that with and Dr. Mark Hyman's here, he's going to talk about, that's true for our bodies, it's true for soil, it's true for ecosystems, it's true for economic systems. And so what these solutions do is create economic complexity in the world. Complexity means more relationships, more connections, more ways in which possibility comes out. And so we're saying is until there's more jobs than people, we're not going to really solve this. Until every person in the world feels valuable and can make a choice about what they want to do. And the answer to reversing global warming is not to go out to 2050 and say, 1.5, 2C, 2050. It's meaningless. Our brains don't work that way. We don't work on future existential threat 32 years from now. You are all here because your ancestors are really good at current existential threat, food, war, defense, habitat, coal, weather, whatever it was, your ancestors got that one right because you're here right now. And that's how the human brain works. So what reversing global warming isn't about future existential threat, it's about meeting current human needs. That's what we have to do. And we're the only species without full employment. Think about that. And I mean, really, all other species work all day and sleep at night, or they work all night and sleep during the day. But whatever they do, they're not sitting around going, a bee doesn't sit around going, God, nothing to do. Nobody wants me at the hive. I mean, we're the only one who's created such a system like that, right? And never has there been so much human need. Never, never. And so we have people who are marginalized, people who are in need, and can we make that connection? And the techniques and practices and technologies and many more that aren't in the book, actually, then you connect those together and you create systems that are regenerative as well, economically regenerative. You saw oceans, how it does, the soil does it. You change the conditions and you create regeneration. And that's how you create 1 billion jobs. And when people have a sense that they matter, that they have purpose, meaning, and they have sense of respect and respect from others and their children and their family, that is the world we want to live in. That's what global warming is telling us to do. Thank you so, so much.